Well, that was fun and games, wasn't it? We're going to move on now to our Innovation Awards session. And we're doing it a bit differently this year. First, I'm going to tell you about our awards and who won them this year, and then we're going to hear from some of the winners right here on the stage. So I'm going to try and not be crushed by people moving furniture while this is going on. Basically, we started doing Innovation Awards back in 2002, and we initially presented them in San Francisco. We did that for a few years. Then we moved them to London in 2005, and then we moved to Hong Kong in 2014. And I think this is very much in keeping with our theme today, that there's no part of the world that has a monopoly on innovation. Not Silicon Valley, not Europe. It is a global endeavor, and you find innovators all over the place. And our winners have been a good global mix, and our judging panel is also a very good global mix as well. We've given awards over the years to all sorts of people: the inventor of the digital camera, the inventors of Wi-Fi, pioneers in areas like 3D printing and space rockets and flash memory, and you name it, we've recognized it. And what we try and do with our award ceremony is a bit like what the Nobel Prizes do, only a bit faster. So the Nobels, they tend to take 20 or 30 years to recognize things. But we're very much in keeping with our definition of innovation as new thinking that creates value. We are looking very much for the creation of value and evidence that the innovation has worked. So this is not about identifying promising startups. This is very much about identifying proven innovators, some of whom are household names and you'll definitely have heard of, and others are not, but perhaps you should have heard of. At least 3 of our winners have gone on to win Nobel Prizes, so that shows you that we're choosing the right people and faster than the Nobel Committee, which is basically what we were trying to do. And for the last few years, since we've moved out to Asia, our Innovation Awards, and in fact even before that, have been sponsored by Huawei. This year they're sponsored by Huawei, the Shenzhen Foundation, and Accenture. So we're very grateful to our sponsors for making all of this possible. So I'm going to tell you who the winners are this year, and then, as I say, we will discuss innovation in all its forms with 3 of our winners. So we have 8 categories, and the first category is bioscience. And our winner this year for developing a rapid cure for hepatitis C is Michael Sophia, the Chief Scientific Officer at Arbutus Biopharma. He and his team spent 3 years experimenting with nucleotides, which are the building blocks of DNA and RNA, and the result was the first in a new class of drugs that interfere with RNA polymerase, and the hepatitis C virus uses this to replicate its RNA. So if you interfere with that mechanism, you can stop the virus replicating. This is a very, very clever way of stopping a disease that's very, very difficult to treat. The resulting drug was initially called sofosbuvir, which is borrowing a bit of Dr. Sophia's own name. It was approved in 2013 by American regulators. And this is a really big deal because traditional hep C cures cure only about 50% of cases, even after a year of taking the therapy. And this new drug, which is now called Sovaldi, still with a little piece of Dr. Sophia's name in there, you'll notice, can cure 90% of patients in just 12 to 24 weeks. So that's an extremely significant change, and that's why he's our winner this year. Our second category is computing and telecoms. And this is an area where we have recognized the pioneers of cloud data storage. And our winners this year are Aaron Levy and Dylan Smith, who founded Box.com, and Drew Houston and Arash Fedowski, who founded Dropbox. And the stories are quite similar. So Aaron Levy wrote a paper while studying at USC where he identified a gap in the market for an easy-to-use online storage system. I don't know about you, but I always used to share stuff between my home and my work computers. I would always email it to myself, and then it would be in my inbox. Or you could take a flash drive, but then you had to remember to carry it. And so the idea that you could just drop stuff into a magic folder and it would sync, which is basically what both of these companies did, was a revelation. It was a great, great thing. Around the same time Aaron Levy was talking about doing this, Drew Houston, who was studying electrical engineering at MIT, and one of his friends, Arash Fedowski, got together and started Dropbox, and that used this magic folder idea. And this pioneered a new way for businesses and consumers to share and store their data. We've just seen the biggest deal in the tech industry, in the computing industry this week, which is that Dell is going to buy EMC, something that's been on the cards for years and years and years. They're going to pay about, what, 100 billion or something for it. The reason they're doing this is because of the rise of cloud storage. EMC is basically in a horrible business now. It has to, in order to compete with Amazon, it has to team up with Dell, and it has to pivot towards a sort of more cloud-based approach. You can't just sell storage to companies anymore. That is a horrible business to be in. So there are winners in that category, and I'm sure there are many people who have directly used that technology today. The third category is consumer products, and our winner there for pioneering legal internet music streaming is Daniel Ek, the founder and chief executive of Spotify. And he's a big fan of both music and technology, and he saw an opportunity to put the two together and provide a legal way for people to access all the music they wanted whenever they wanted to. This was the promise of Napster back in 2000, 2001. It was a celestial jukebox. You could just type in the name of any song and start listening to it. It was fantastic. Slight problem, it was completely illegal. And what Daniel Ek did was he said, well, how would you build a version of that service that would be legal? Steve Jobs' answer was, well, we'll let people buy tracks one at a time, and that was the result was iTunes. And he said people wanted to own their music, but it now seems that actually they don't. They want streaming, they want access to everything, and for a flat monthly fee as well. I'm a huge fan of Spotify myself. What Daniel Ek did was he did a deal with the record companies, and he's basically said, we will pay you a monthly fee if you give us access to your libraries. And Spotify users can now get access to an enormous library of tracks. It's available in 58 countries. The average Spotify user listens to more than 2.5 hours of music every day. There are 75 million users, of whom 20 million are paying subscribers, and the rest of them have their listening interrupted occasionally with ads. But it really has changed the way people consume music. And the most recent innovation is the Discover Weekly playlist. Anyone here a big fan of Discover Weekly? Isn't it fantastic? So basically, it figures out what music you like, and every week it gives you a personally curated playlist of stuff it thinks you'll like. It's incredibly good, and you can't believe it's automated. It's doing this for tens of millions of people. So very, very innovative company there. The fourth category is our corporate award, which goes to companies that innovate. And this is quite an interesting winner in the light of the debate we've just had. The award goes to Alibaba. Obviously, we've discussed them many times today. Their name has come up on many occasions. And, you know, to translate to people only familiar with Western firms, you say, well, it's a bit like Amazon and eBay crunched together. Oh, yeah, and PayPal. Only it also has, you know, more credit data on Chinese consumers than anyone else. And something like 70%, this is an amazing statistic from a piece that Vijay wrote a couple of years ago, 70% of the packages being moved around in China at any one time are something to do with Alibaba. So it is quite extraordinary what they've done. There hasn't been a sort of single big bang innovation here. It's been about translating business models to China. It's been about putting together different innovations in different areas. But the result really has been a transformation, a domination of online shopping in China, but a transformation of e-commerce in China as well. To the end of March this year, the gross value of goods bought and sold on Alibaba's Chinese marketplaces totaled $394 billion, with 350 million active customers during that period. So a quite astonishing impact. Our fifth category is environment, energy and environment. And our winner there for creating high-performance electric cars goes jointly to J.B. Straubel, who is the CTO, and Elon Musk, CEO of Tesla Motors. And this is a company that's really transformed the way people think about electric cars. People used to think of electric cars as, you know, rather clunky things that didn't go very fast. You had to recharge them all the time. And boy, has Tesla changed that perception. With the ludicrous mode, as they call it, on their Model S, you can do 0 to 60 in 2.8 seconds, faster than a Porsche 911, way faster than a Porsche 911, and yet it can seat 7 people. Their new vehicle, the Model X, which was unveiled a couple of weeks ago, is a very nice crossover SUV aimed at soccer mums, but it can also do 0 to 60 in 3 seconds if you want it to. And this is an absolutely brilliant play on Tesla's part to start to seed the market with a roadster, then to move on to a saloon that can also go incredibly fast. They give you both performance and range, and they're gradually working their way down as they get increasing economies of scale to a mass market electric vehicle. So they really are changing the way that we see that whole industry and disrupting the car industry from below. Our sixth category is called product and service innovation, which changes the way that an existing business, an existing industry actually works. And our winners in this case are a household name. For app-based ride-hailing, the award goes to Travis Kalanick and Garrett Camp, who are the founders of Uber. And they had the idea for Uber in 2008 while failing to get a cab in Paris. Can be very hard to get a cab in Paris, and in many places. In San Francisco, it's a complete nightmare. They wondered, why couldn't you just push a button on your phone and get a cab? So they implemented exactly that, connecting riders with drivers via a smartphone app, making billing seamless, making the same app with the same billing work everywhere in the world. It really is life-changing and has had an enormous impact in many, many countries. It's in 58 countries now, more than 300 cities, and in fact, China is now its biggest market, I believe. Chengdu, I think, is the biggest city for Uber. So this is not just a Silicon Valley phenomenon. It is not just used by Silicon Valley geeks. This is really enormous all over the world. In its most recent funding round, Uber was valued at $50 billion. So this is really a giant, giant startup. Our seventh category is social and economic innovation. And in this category, our winners for bringing world-class education to low-income African children are Shannon May and Jay Kimmelman, who are the founders of Bridge International Academies. And they had the idea for this while doing postdoctoral research in China, in fact, on the modernization of rural China. And Shannon May, who's an anthropologist by training, had the idea for basically institutionalizing high-standard education, using technology to deliver it, using data to measure how effectively it's being delivered. And the result is that they can open schools which are private schools, but they can deliver a very good education at a very low price. And Bridge opened its first school in Mukuru, which is a slum in Nairobi, in 2009. It now has 414 academies, teaching more than 100,000 pre-primary and primary school children in Kenya, Uganda, and Nigeria. And our final category is called No Boundaries, conveniently a category into which we can put anything we like. And this is, I think, the category that has allowed us to keep the definition of our categories reasonably fixed for the past 10 years. I'd love to be able to say this winner is here today, but I'm afraid he's not because no one knows who it is. Our winner in this category is Satoshi Nakamoto, who may or may not exist, may or may not be female. No one knows what part of the world he or she, or may even be they, come from. There may be more than one person called Satoshi Nakamoto. But they are, of course, the inventor of Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is this amazingly clever online digital currency, but cleverer still is the blockchain technology that sits underneath it. So it's a bit like Napster, which I mentioned earlier. Napster was the first example of a really popular peer-to-peer app. And although Napster itself was shut down for being totally illegal, the idea of peer-to-peer delivery outlived it. And peer-to-peer technology now underpins things like Skype and, in fact, Spotify. So when you listen to Spotify, 60% of the packets that come to you across the internet are actually delivered from other Spotify users, not from Spotify's server farms. And that's because it's a peer-to-peer system. Similarly, people say that although Bitcoin, the price goes up and down, although it's been pretty stable around $250 lately, you may not want to touch it with a barge pole as a currency, but the underlying blockchain technology has got a lot of people very excited about what you can do about it. So those are our winners for this year. So please join me in congratulating them all, whether they're here or not. Well done, all of you. So I'd like to introduce our panelists, and we are fortunate today to have with us Michael Sophia, who's our winner in the bioscience category, so please join me on the stage. Shannon May, who's one of the two winners in our social and economic innovation category, and Sam Gelman, who is the North Asia General Manager at Uber, the company that has won in our Process and Service Awards winner. So please come and join me, and we can talk about all of these things. You're all armed with microphones. And I mentioned my daughter earlier on and said that someone has suggested I bring her next year, which I think is a great idea. Shannon has done exactly that this year. So where's Chloe?
Hey, Chloe.
You're going to wave. Hello. Hello, Chloe. Excellent. Your mum is awesome. Right. Let's start. Perhaps I can start with you, Michael Sophia. Tell me the story behind this innovation, because pharma is one of those areas where we talk about blue sky, but you really do have to sort of go into a field without necessarily knowing what you're going to find or with a particular agenda, and then sometimes you're taken by surprise. So how did you end up developing this treatment for hepatitis C?
Well, I think it's quite a long story, but the idea of starting with the particular target that we looked at, the biological target, really focused around trying to develop a drug that had what they call pan-genotypic activity, meaning it could work across a number of different variants of the virus that we were looking at. and also that would have activity against resistant viruses, meaning, or had high barrier to resistance, meaning the drug, when given to an individual, it would be very difficult for the virus to mutate to another form, and therefore the drug not be active.
And were you originally targeting HIV rather than hepatitis C?
Right, right. Well, it goes back to this sort of fail fast question, right?
Right.
So we were looking at HIV very early on in the company's history, and actually came across some innovative discoveries in the hepatitis C arena that really convinced us to really change our focus into hepatitis C, because it was really a more unmet medical need area than HIV at the time, which had a number of drugs that were seeming to satisfy the market, at least maintaining the virus under control, where hep C was really an area that there really was no really good cure for that particular
And at this
disease.
stage, were you in academia, or was this at a startup?
This was at a startup company,
Right.
yeah.
So you were taking on, I mean, there's an unmet need there, but there's also a, you know, were the incentives set up for hep C? Was this something where there was going to be a market?
Well, clearly, you know, for hepatitis C, there's 180 million individuals worldwide infected with hepatitis C. And the therapies that existed at the time were very hard to take. Many patients actually didn't complete therapy because of the difficulty in taking those therapies. So there's really a real, not only medical need out there, but incredible market opportunity for someone who came along with an innovative cure.
Right. So this was at a small biotech company called Pharmasset at this time.
Yeah.
So once you got this very promising drug going, the company was then sold to, how do you pronounce that company's name?
Gilead.
Gilead, okay, for $11.5 billion. So is this the only way for a small startup to get its products to market? Do they basically, that's always the plan, that you sell out, or do some of them actually scale up and do it themselves?
No, actually, some do scale up and do it themselves. A number of biotech companies have gone from startup to successful marketed commercial companies.
Yep.
You know, our situation was, you know, the offer that was offered to Pharmasset was certainly viewed by the board as an offer that they couldn't refuse.
Right.
It turned out to be the largest pre-commercial acquisition of a biotech company in history, and still is to date. So it was clearly an offer that was worthy taking.
Okay, now this has all been in the news again recently because of the fuss over drug pricing. And in fact, there's another drug, a completely different drug from a different company, where they put the price up by 700% and all the rest of it. But there's very much a debate around these things. Your therapy is clearly very superior to existing therapies. But the question is, how should drug companies price that? Do you just try and steer clear of this whole question? Because the usual answer from pharmaceutical researchers is, well, it's very expensive. You know, the figure that is always quoted, it costs $1 billion to get a drug through development and so on. How do you decide what is a justified price, or do you just avoid that question?
Well, certainly that's not within my basket of responsibilities. But I will say, you know, for this particular drug, you know, it is a cure. It is actually the first cure of a viral disease. So it's, you know, it provides not only sort of the economic benefit to the company, but a tremendous medical benefit for patients who would otherwise be spending, you know, decades of their life with chronic liver disease, cirrhosis, or even going on to hepatocellular carcinoma, many of them having to get liver transplants. So when you really look at the economics of it, to have a cure which you take for 12 weeks, a single pill once a day, you know, really, I think, overshadows the
So in the
issues.
UK, we have this body called NICE, the National Institute of Clinical and Healthcare Excellence, or something like that. And it's an example of a public sector innovation, I suppose, where we do the cost-benefit analysis, and we say, well, that sounds great, and if it's, you know, £1,000 a day, we'll probably pay that. But if it was £1 million a day, we wouldn't. And so they actually have, you know, it is a form of rationing. It really is what is worth paying for and what isn't. And when NICE decides that something's worth paying for, then you can get it on the National Health Service. And if they say that you can't, then you can't. So we have a process for deciding that. This country doesn't have that. And furthermore, Medicare is not allowed even to negotiate over prices. So we've seen Hillary Clinton, for example, has proposed some really quite draconian interventions. She wants to set a minimum amount that drug companies have to spend on R&D and all the rest of it. Do you think that's productive, or do you think that's impeding drug companies' ability to decide what to do with their money?
I do think it's impeding what drug companies are going to be able to do with their money. I mean, if you look at it, this is a very risky business. You know, the chances of success in any drug discovery and development effort is very, very small. So if you're going to have people willing to invest money, and it's costing hundreds of millions of dollars to get from point A to point B, then they're going to have some opportunity for gain at the end. And if you wipe out that opportunity, where is the money going to be to invest in those really risky endeavors? And so I think the idea of trying to limit the financial benefit or financial gain from investors is going to be a very difficult and kind of think counterproductive endeavor for the industry.
But what she seems to be targeting there is I can't remember which drug company it is, but there's one of them that goes around, it doesn't basically do any R&D at all. Right. All it does is buy successful companies like yours and then jack up the prices of their drugs. And so what she's trying to do is say, hey, that doesn't count. We should compel you. We should basically regulate the size of your R&D budget. But that's a legitimate business model, that just sort of buy the people who succeed one.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's certainly not the business model I would sort of profess to be.
Well, you've benefited from sitting on the other side of that model.
Right, right.
And you're now back at another small biotech company.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask why. I mean, is there something special about innovation within a small biotech firm that you couldn't have achieved if you'd stayed within Gilead? Yeah,
I started this biotech company, so I'm a founder of this new company called Arbutus Biopharma. And yeah, I had the opportunity to go to Gilead. It is a great company. I chose to start another startup simply because I feel that the ability to innovate within a small environment the environment is more conducive to innovation.
And why is that? Because big companies struggle with this and trying to kind of create a small company ethos inside them. Why don't they succeed?
There are too many people in a big company to tell you that something won't work. And
so
I think there are too many individuals in a large company that are willing to convince themselves or you that an idea is not worthy pursuing. And I think in a small startup, you have the opportunity to pursue ideas if you believe in them.
So there's too many people who might say no. Because
Right.
the flip side of that is in a big company, you ought to have more people who come up with more ideas. So, but anyway, on balance, it ends up being worse. Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Shannon May, I'd like to come to you now and ask you about the company that you started. So this came out of postdoc research in China. So how did postdoc anthropology research in China turn into schools in Africa?
Well, so I was working on a carbon neutral city program, actually in Liaoning province. But the day I arrived with my backpack to live in this village, I was told by the provincial governor that I was not allowed to do so, and unless I became the village primary school teacher, I would be kicked out of the province.
That was an interesting
so
condition.
I was co-opted into my new Danwei, and
Right.
kind of told what I was going to have to do. And so I said, fine, I'll do it. Got the school to change the schedule, so I was at least teaching all my classes in the morning from 8 to 11, and then I could do my work the rest of the day. And what I saw over time was just this, it was part of this massive big development, like capital D development program between the Ministry of Science and Technology and a bunch of very large corporations. Lots of money being spent on it to try to supposedly solve problems of rural life in China. But the real problem was in the classroom. It was that you had 6 to 12-year-olds going through school, in school, but illiterate in Chinese when they're 12 years old and supposed to be leaving primary school, not functionally numerate, and certainly couldn't speak English. And if you couldn't pass the English test, you couldn't go on to middle school and high school. And so it was seeing that poverty really started in that classroom really changed my perspective on what was really important.
So what was your response to that? It was to formalize the structure of the curriculum first and foremost?
It was first to understand parent income. So,
Right.
so the real issue was, myself as a parent, likely yourself, everyone in this room has choice about where you send your children to school. You can manage resources. You're not controlled by a monopoly. You're able to choose amongst many options for your children. If you're a parent who lives in poverty or has a very low income, you don't have choice because there essentially isn't a competitive market in most of the places you live. And seeing that frustration amongst the parents I worked with in China was really painful. And so then it was looking at, well, was this just a really crazy problem in this very remote rural village? Or was this a larger issue? And so then started doing research on that globally and was incredibly depressed by finding out that For example, in sub-Saharan Africa, if you look at Uganda and Kenya, more than 60% of children fail the national primary exit exam every year. And if you're from a low-income household, it's close to 75%. And so that this was a global problem. And so to start looking at how to create a business model that could work at the amount of money a parent could afford, who maybe only earned $100 a month, $80 a month, but what could they pay to send 2 to 3 children to school? And could we design a business process that could then meet that need and deliver learning outcome?
So we should point out, for people who aren't familiar, that the model of private education, which we associate with very, very high prices and how the elite educates its children in the West in particular, there is quite a large private education sector in sub-Saharan Africa that works at surprisingly low costs. But the quality is quite variable. But essentially, it's a response to the uselessness of the state-run education system, where very often the teachers don't show up at all. No one cares whether they do or not. So certainly when I've been in Uganda, I was there on the first of the month once, and there were lots and lots of people queuing up. And I said to my guide, why are all these people queuing up? And it was because they were paying their children's school fees. And these are people who are so poor they don't have bank accounts. They can now pay them using their mobile phones, but at the time they were literally taking cash to the bank to pay it into the bank accounts for the schools, and that's how they were paying to educate their children. So the idea that private education is and for-profit education is another twist on that. I mean, these are things that are sort of, I think, people have some reservations about the way that works in the West, but this is actually a thriving business in Africa. So how does your approach differ from the sorts of things that had come before in that space, which is the for-profit private education but low-cost private education sector in Africa?
Yeah, so surprisingly, if you haven't lived there, it would be surprising to most people in this room that it's a huge market. I mean, like, conservative estimates are that's a $52 billion market to serve families earning less than $2 per day per capita. There are currently hundreds of thousands of these schools, almost all of them for profit. So what we saw was there already were people trying to solve these problems for their own children and for their own communities, but they essentially didn't have any access to resources or investment to really try to change the equation of what could happen in the classroom. So a typical low-fee school can compete on accountability. Usually they have better teacher attendance, slightly better time on task, some of these really core things that are important. But they don't have the ability to invest in a radically new teacher training program. They don't have the ability to invest in creating new teacher and learner content, and they certainly don't have the ability to invest in designing their own operating system to connect school leaders and teachers back to a back-of-house academic R&D team, which is what we do. So we create all of our lessons for all of our teachers. We publish them to them every day for that day and 8 days forward. And then using that same operating system, we get teacher attendance, pupil attendance, and all of the assessment scores back. So we can, in fairly close to real time, change the content for that same pupil, right? So usually in a typical publishing environment, it might be 3 or 4 years before you change your textbook to accommodate what you've learned. Maybe you didn't do so well in volume 1, but we can do that in the next week. So it's being able to invest in that type of R&D, both academic and technology, but yet being able to price that at about $6 a month.
Right, so $6 a month is what we're talking about to educate a single child. And you're delivering that courseware through tablet computers, is that right? And how often do they have to be updated? I mean, you basically don't have reliable full-time internet access in a lot of these places. So do they get sort of updated every night? How does that actually work?
So we actually don't have electricity connected to any of the 414 schools we run.
Right.
We leverage electricity connectivity, which is within the region. And so we're very particular about using e-ink devices for our teachers because they need to be in use 9 to 10 hours a day. We only have to charge them once to twice a week, so that's pretty important to us. But we use internet from the mobile service, so we don't have a landline connectivity. We just leverage all the work that MTN, Etisalat, Airtel, Safaricom have already been doing.
Right, brilliant. And why did you end up doing this in Africa when the idea came in China? Would you actually be able to operate a business like this in China? Would that be allowed?
So when I was first thinking about this, which was like 2005 to 2007, I don't think so. And I also thought, given my experience with working with the provincial and central government in China, from an environmental point of view, was that if I ever wanted to be able to do something like this in the villages that I had worked, I better be able to prove myself someplace else, prove that it would work, prove that it was not political, that this was truly a service that matches a national requirements. We're not trying to decide what the country should teach, we just want to teach it really well. So going forward, we have been approached, now that we're 8 years in, by a few investment firms who specialize in work in China, seeing if we could think about this as a new market for us.
Okay, and then finally on the for-profit nature of this, I mean, this is the sort of thing that I think most people who don't know about the sector would just assume, this is what charities should be doing. And the only way to make this work is to basically have charities that do this on the ground. And so what's the case for doing this through a profit-making organization? Why does it work that way?
The first reason is because the parent can put you out of business. So, and it was really important to us that, I don't know, if we were bad, like if the education was bad, if the parents didn't like it, the parent could say, I'm not going to pay you, and you're going to get shut down. And my experience as a trained anthropologist was that one of the real problems is often you have a huge disconnect between a donor-funded project and what the so-called beneficiary actually needs. I've even heard it described, like literally at a conference I was at a week ago at the UN General Assembly, that, oh, those people, they don't know what they need. They just think they want that, but that's not what they need. And I was like, I can't believe people still say that. Like, this parent knows what they need. They should be treated with respect. And if it's a service that works for them, the only reason this parent earns money is to be able to spend it to buy things that make their life and their child's life better. So we really wanted to be beholden to a parent. So that put us into one type of thinking about being for-profit and transactional to serving a customer. But also a nonprofit has a really hard time amassing capital. So to do the type of both technology and academic pedagogy R&D stuff that we do, we burn a lot of capital right now, trying to make sure that we're actually producing something that can change children's lives. And that's not the type of money that an NGO can usually attract, and not on a consistent basis.
Right, okay, and is the company now profitable?
No, so we priced ourselves from a parent's income, right? And then backtracked, well, what could this mother afford to spend for 2 to 3 kids every month? And then from there went forward to, okay, so if all we can charge is about $6 a month per child, what scale do we need to be at? With how many people are we serving to then be able to be self-financed?
And what's the answer? How many academies do you need to reach that profitable scale?
Well, it's more about children.
Okay, sorry, how many students?
But around 500,000.
500,000, okay, so you're 100,000 in, so you have a business plan somewhere that says in 2020 or something like that, you get into the black.
It should be sooner than that.
Okay.
We used to quadruple every year, we now double, so 2.5 to 3 years.
Excellent, good growth rate there, brilliant, thank you very much. Okay, finally, I'm going to come to you, Sam, and ask you about Uber. Actually, one of the things that I thought about earlier on, we heard about the importance with a startup of it being defensible. Why is Uber defensible? Surely someone else could just show up with an app that connects riders to drivers, and what's Uber got that no one else has?
It's an interesting question. I started at Uber. I was the first international employee, so I started in London, and I launched that business. And Addison Lee had a very big business
by the way.
there. Oh, yeah, our pleasure. Addison Lee had a huge business there, but I think the fundamental difference, when we launched Singapore, which was our first Asian city, Comfort Del Gro had a great app that you could push a button and get a taxi. So these guys were doing a little bit of what Uber saw itself at the beginning as, but I think fundamentally Uber is different from those companies because we really see ourselves as a technology company. And when you see yourself as a technology company, you start observing status quo that might not make sense. So things for us where we realize we can really get the price cheaper if we really whittle down the economics to what it needs to be. And suddenly we found that we could reduce prices by 40% and achieve huge scale that our competitors weren't reaching. But it's other things. We realized that people couldn't get cars when it rained, and we could use our technology to change that. We realized that it doesn't make sense that after this event, 2 people are going to the exact same destination, and you're going to take 2 cars.
So Uber Pool
different taxis.
Is that bit, and then surge pricing is your response to the rain.
Surge pricing, and so we came up with Uber Pool, with just in July, we think saved over 1 million miles driven, and we were only in 5 cities at the time. Now we're already in 5 cities in China alone. And I think it's this constant mentality of seeing yourself as a technology company and really figuring out where in the status quo things can get better. And for me, it's an interesting thing, because when we launched Hong Kong, Travis, our CEO, was in town, and the SCMP said, well, I don't think we need you. You can get a red taxi anywhere. And Travis said, well, I think you have just gotten so used to the status quo that you've lost your sense of imagination. And all these things that I just mentioned are true here as well. So I think that's kind of the mentality that's allowed us to continue to win. Now, I think what's defensible about Uber is the scale. When, the San Francisco example, over the past 3 years, our prices have gone down by 40%. Our drivers have gotten 50% busier, and they're making just as much money now as they used to, and we're 40% cheaper than taxis, and taxi drivers are switching from taxi to driving for Uber. Okay, and that's a function of lower arrival times, and that's a function of of this huge brand value that we've created all over the world, that people have just gotten used to push a button and you can get a ride in 3 minutes now in Guangzhou, China, in Sydney, Australia, in Cape Town, South Africa.
So it's the brand value and it's the network effect of being as big as you are makes it hard for anyone else to be as big as you are.
I'd put it on the scale first, and again, I think it's really also that mentality of really seeing yourself as an innovative technology company. And the one other thing I'd say, and this has been, to me, the most amazing thing about being there and being with this team, is that we are constantly disrupting ourselves. And when I got to Uber, we called ourselves this baller brand. You push a button and a limo came up. And eventually we realized that what luxury meant, if you talk to our customers, they thought luxury meant a Mercedes S-Class. What luxury meant was push a button and have it show up in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
No cash. And you're better able to do that when you're cheap.
Yeah.
So Prius actually now, I think, is more luxurious than a Mercedes S-Class, because we could scale that to a price where no matter where you are in hundreds of cities around the world, you have a car in 2 minutes.
Yeah, luxury is not having to wait. Yeah.
Luxury is not having to wait. I'd say if you asked yourselves what's luxurious, very few people care about a BMW 7 Series. People care about getting where they need to go really, really quickly. And in the beginning, we didn't see that. It was our CEO. It was really Travis, who said, guys, I don't care about what you call the brand. We're gonna lower our prices. We're gonna get really, really cheap, and we're gonna see what happens. And to those of us who had been at Uber, that was we were getting disrupted.
But at the other end of the scale, you've added helicopters in some places. The other day, when the UN General Assembly was going on, and the Pope was in town, and Xi Jinping, I think it was just a complete gridlock in the US, and in New York, you could take an Uber, you could take a helicopter from the east side to the west side or something. There were actually people doing this.
Yeah, look, I think at our core, I'd say another thing about it is we've done a lot of things that have really captured people's imagination.
Yeah.
And Uber spends very little money on marketing, on advertising, and I think we've just been able to capture people's attention, get people excited. You know what? Transportation's not a sexy sector. It was never interesting. And suddenly, Uber has become this phenomenon, and I think that's because we're talking about helicopters or because we're delivering ice cream on demand in minutes. But at its core, our mission is transportation as reliable as running water everywhere for everyone, and I think that focus has really been key.
That's a great mission statement. The interesting thing about Uber with its market cap at the moment is it's worth more than all of the other sharing economy firms put together. So it seems to be one of these winner-take-all markets again. We see this time and time again. Facebook is worth more than all the other social networks put together. But I wanted to ask you about the term sharing economy. I hate it, because this has got nothing to do with sharing, and I think peer-to-peer rental is much better. What's your favorite term for the kind of, or do you just not compare yourself to the others because you're big?
It's tough for me to think about terminology in that sense, because that's not really what we're focused on. I mean, I think it's using existing assets. I mean, if you take Hong Kong, for example, Hong Kong private car ownership is growing at 3x the pace of population growth in a city that really has congestion issues, and that has space issues. So all these cars, and 95% of the cars right now are parked. 95% of them are parked. So can we take these assets and make them much more widely used? Let's save those parking places, and let's think, how can we use technology to just make resources more efficient? And I think that's what it's about. Let's just increase the utilization here. I don't know the term, but I think when we do that, these cities are going to have a lot more space for parks. There's going to be a lot less congestion. When you really get carpooling going, I think all the things that cities are going after right now to deal with population growth are going to be a lot easier.
And then you make them self-driving as well, and you're really off to the races. You have these Uber pool, ad hoc bus lane. Anyway, so what you're talking about then is peer-to-peer rental of underutilized resources is the definition you've just sort of written for yourself there. The other thing I really wanted to ask you about was Uber in China. You've seen that story right from the beginning. What's the story there? Because it's now the biggest market, right?
It's one of the biggest. It's one of our top two, and I don't know if it's quite there yet, but I think, look, the speed of growth in China has been amazing, and I think China needs services like this because if everyone gets richer and gets their own car, the gridlocks you see right now are going to get even worse. So you need to find ways to use the resources that are out there to introduce carpooling services. Right now in San Francisco, and Chengdu and Guangzhou, we have carpooling services where 3 people, if 3 of us are all going to Stanley after this, Uber will connect us all together and we'll take the same car. So we just got rid of 2 cars off the road.
Right.
And that's just, and I think what you're seeing in China is that's just really, really important. And we've been operating there now for 2 years, but we've really grown over the past year. And the growth and the speed with which we've been allowed to grow has been faster than anything we've seen in any country around the world.
Now that's interesting because we know that you face basically pushback from people all over the world. You're not going in Las Vegas yet. I was in France where they were, taxi drivers were barricading. They love their barricading in France, but they were barricading the airport in protest of Uber, et cetera, et cetera. How does the regulatory environment in China compare to those other places? Are the authorities favoring the local version of Uber, Didi? I can't remember the second half of their name.
Well, I mean, look, we've been able to grow. It will be one of our biggest markets in the world. So, I think it's been, so far, China's just been very welcoming. They're drafting regulations, which I think is really progressive. It's showing that we need to figure out how do we incorporate this that clearly makes riders better off because they're choosing it, that clearly makes drivers better off because they're choosing it. How do we incorporate that into regulations? And they're trying to find that solution. And I think that's just hugely important for this technology to be able to work its way into cities.
So you welcome the regulation because it basically ends the uncertainty.
Yeah, I mean, Uber needs to be regulated. And we need to work with regulators to figure out what are their goals? Is the goal safety? Is the goal consumer choice? Is the goal fewer cars? Well, we have hundreds of engineers. It's for one of the first companies in the world. It's hundreds of engineers focused on what used to just be the taxi business. How can we work together? We're doing this all over the world. How can we work together to make this happen? And we do need that because it's the only way that we will scale. It's the only way that valuation you mentioned will come to fruition is if we find a way to work with cities and realize we have the exact same goals.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'd like to give our audience a chance to ask any questions they might have for our panelists. Do we have any questions from the floor about any of these innovations and business models? We have a question over here.
Yes, I have a question for the gentleman of Uber. There is a lot of times heard that in the future Uber will provide a service like deliver package or even deliver lunch to your home. That is true or?
Is this true? You're going to get into food delivery and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, we have a product called Uber Eats, which is taking off. It's been a great service. We have some delivery models. I think it's a lot of just testing what can work if you put good minds and good engineering and good big data kind of into these problems. So we're looking at a lot of different things. One thing I would say is the core business of transportation is such a huge opportunity. At one of our all-staff calls recently, someone asked our CEO, said, how should we think about our mature markets differently from our new markets? And he said, look, our mature markets are growing 3x year on year. New York, San Francisco, these markets are tripling right now in their 5th year, and some of them are billion-dollar businesses. So I don't even think we've even got to the brink of what maturity looks like for transportation. And I would say our focus, transportation as reliable as running water everywhere for everyone, and just being laser focused on that mission has been a core to success. But we are looking at what else could eventually scale with that business.
Okay, brilliant. Now we've actually got the trophies for our winners who are here. So where are they? They're next to the stage somewhere. Oh, they're over here. So I'd like to present the trophies to our winners and then we can take a photo. But thank you very much for joining us and telling us the stories behind your winning innovations. Thank you all very much indeed. Please join me in congratulating our winners. And can I have all 3 of them? So this one is for Michael Sophia. So there's yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And this one is for Shannon May. Thank you very much. And finally, this is actually the one for Garrett Camp rather than Travis, but you're accepting it on their behalf. So thank you
on behalf of Garrett.
So if we can get you a little bit closer, then we can have a picture. Thank you all very much indeed. Our winners. Great. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed.